What keeps farm animals warm in the winter? This video is going to be broken up into a few different categories. That way you can skip through the timestamps to find the animal that you are the most interested about, or watch the whole thing because each one of them has an interesting and incredible way to stay warm in the winter. The first category is the ruminant, which covers a few different animals, all which have rumens. The second category is avian, or also known as birds. And the third category I'm going to call the hind gut fermenters. The first topic, which is the largest, is the category known as the ruminant. Some ruminants have lots of hair or fiber like alpacas or sheep, while others are like cows that don't actually have tons of fiber but do have a rumen which helps keep them warm. Now, why are animals such as cows, goats, sheep, even deer, and kind of animals like alpacas and llamas known as ruminants? Well, they have an incredible stomach. It's one stomach that starts with a fermentation chamber called the rumen. Everything they eat, any kind of forage, grass, hay, and even the grain they eat is all focused in that rumen by being broken down, but not by stomach acids like humans or other animals, but by bacteria, fungi, and protozoa. These little microorganisms inside break down this food. This bacteria breaks down nearly all of the food that's inside of that cow's rumen. And in doing so, it creates an incredible heater and heat source inside of the cow's stomach itself. However, it's not just the rumen that keeps these ruminants warm. A lot of their body temperature comes from growing a winter coat, which keeps in a lot of that warmth, and it comes from a behavior of huddling. They'll bring their bodies close together and huddle for warmth, a lot like you would if you were too cold. But most people who are not around cattle or goats that don't see hair on them most of the time don't realize that these animals do grow a winter coat, and they actually shed in the summertime as well. Now, I know I said cows, but this same process goes for all ruminants. Goats are the exact same way. They will keep their bodies warm, not just by the fur on their outside, but largely by that rumen inside of their gut. And sheep are actually so similar to goats in their rumen that even those sheep with large hair amounts that are so fluffy don't actually fully need those in order to stay warm in the winter. A lot of that strictly comes from the rumen itself, inside of their own bodies. But something amazing about those sheep with those large fluffy bodies, because they have so much hair covering their skin, it is an incredible wind block, because cows and goats and even deer really need to be protected from that wind, especially being out here in the elements when things can get so cold and windy. A lot of that heat that's being created from the inside of their body is being swept away from that wind. And as we talk about these ruminants with hair or fiber like a sheep, we also have to talk about alpacas that are kind of known as pseudo-ruminants. And these pseudo-ruminants are alpacas, llamas, and camels. They're known as pseudo-ruminants because they don't necessarily have one major stomach with different chambers. They're kind of compartmentalists. This acts almost identical in the way that a ruminant's rumen works, yet it's broken up differently. But despite them being pseudo-ruminants, the fermentation chamber on the inside of their body, which they still have, which is also called the rumen, works almost identical in keeping them warm. But because of alpaca's very thick and very dense fiber, they're able to be protected from elements and storms and rain and ice, because it all just gets collected on the outside while their bodies keep them warm on the inside. There's many times that I've seen alpacas out here laying around in the snow completely fine and actually smoking. Their bodies just steam this heat off of them because their rumens on the inside are keeping them so warm, and it's a giant blanket keeping all of that warmth on the inside. If we go over here real quick, you can actually just see the snow resting on top of the alpacas, the back of their fiber. Because of their fiber, they really don't mind it. Goats, on the other hand, well, goats that aren't used to the snow don't like snow on their backs. They don't even like rain falling from the sky on them. But alpacas and things like a really fluffy sheep really can handle these elements a lot differently than an animal without a big fluffy coat. Now let's move on to the avian section. When I'm talking about avian species, I'm talking about chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, guinea fowl, and the like. They're incredibly cold tolerant. Now, you can have more tolerant breeds than others, but generally, chickens can survive at up to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is incredible because tons of people put heaters inside of chicken coops when you really don't need to. All of these different types of birds have two types of feathers. They have down feathers, which are the underlayer feather, and then outer feathers, which you normally see, the traditional looking feathers. The down feathers really suck in and keep so much of that heat inside of their bodies, while the other feathers, their flight feathers, and those long, elongated, flatter feathers really help keep all of that heat that the down feathers are helping keep in. It's another separate layer on the outside of it, keeping everything in, keeping them really warm. Then ducks and geese, or animals that go into the water, have another layer of protection. This protection is a waxy layer that goes on the outside of their feathers and their skin. This really helps repel water, keeping them even warmer. These ducks and geese can go all the way up to -50 degrees Fahrenheit before they can have problems with their circulatory systems. And speaking of the circulatory system, birds have a very interesting way of regulating their heat based off of the flow of blood from their feet circulated throughout the rest of their bodies. In fact, birds tend to do better in colder climates than they do in warmer. It has something to do with them wearing a blanket on them all the time. And for the last part, we're going to be pairing together two animals that you would never think should be paired together, and that is horses and rabbits. And why am I going to be pairing them together? Well, that's because they're both hindgut fermentators. Fermenters. They both ferment food behind their gut. Let me quickly explain. As the food comes in, it goes into their stomach. Then from their stomach, it goes in and has a choice to go out the backside or into a fermentation vat called the cecum over here. That cecum also ferments food and it comes back out. And both of these animals can choose to eat that fermented food going back into their gut, through their system, and all the way back out. This is different than an animal with a rumen, where it goes into their fermentation chamber first, then through that, then to their stomach, then out their backside. Much different, but they both have fermentation vats inside of their bodies. The hindgut fermentation is not as effective or as warm as a rumen inside of a ruminant. This leads them to needing heat in other ways, not just off of breaking down the food through the bacteria in their guts. Rabbits not only keep their body warm from their small fermentation chamber inside of their gut, but they also keep their bodies warm from their super lovable fluffy outsides. Rabbits are pretty comfortable at about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but they also have another way of staying warm, and that's by their rabbit dens. As they dig down into the rabbit den, underneath the ground actually stays a lot warmer than it does above the surface. Horses, like a lot of the other animals we talked about, have a fluffy outer coat, and they do grow a winter coat keeping their bodies in. Horses, along with their massive size, also have a lot of fat reserves inside of their bodies that help keep them warm. This is incredible because some breeds of horses can go to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is incredible. They even have a shiver reflex. A lot like a person who shivers when they get cold, the shiver that you might see from a horse is a natural shake reflex, helping their bodies regulate that temperature on the inside of their body. It's a natural thing that these horses do and isn't necessarily a sign that something's going wrong with them or that it's too cold outside. But just like most of the other animals, horses need to have shelter in order to get outside of the elements. Wind is a killer for most animals because if they're not able to keep that barrier of heat surrounding them, it gets swept away and they can't regulate their heat, and this is when they die. As we end this, we can see that most of these animals can tolerate temperatures way colder than we would ever expect. The thing that they absolutely need, though, to emphasize is shelter for most of these animals because wind is killer. I know I said it again, but I need to emphasize, wind is the killer, not the cold. Well, I really appreciate you being here, and I really hope that you are enjoying the cold and the snow with your animals.